Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our Addiction Hope webinar for this evening. We're so glad that you've taken time out of your schedule to join us tonight. Our topic for this evening will be a presentation on understanding sexual addiction, featuring our guest speaker this evening, Paul Loosemore. So welcome, Paul. We're so happy to have you with us. And just before we get started, I want to point out a couple things for all our attendees who are with us this evening. Paul will be doing a presentation, and then we will be transitioning into a Q&A period for the webinar for tonight. You will have the opportunity to submit questions to Paul, and you can do this via the questions pane of your control panel. So at any point of the presentation, if you have a question that you would like for Paul to answer, please feel free to enter that into the questions pane, and then we will address that at the end of the presentation. So Paul, thanks again for being here with us tonight. I know we've had you on with us before, and this is kind of your topic of expertise, so we really appreciate you taking the time to join us.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And before we kind of delve into this, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and just your current involvement in the addiction community?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm based in St. Louis. I live here with my family of four. I work in private practice as a therapist here. In terms of the addiction community, I kind of started out there leading groups for kind of those in recovery from a sexual addiction. And that lasted for a number of years. I did that and then went on to supervise and train those leaders. But now primarily it's working with individuals and couples that are either going through sexual addiction recovery for that and then on to rebuilding relationships. That's kind of the bulk of what I do, alongside some of what I'm going to touch on later, but kind of putting some resources and materials together for people that don't have really any other point of contact for some good help.
I mean, we're looking forward to hearing about those resources. And, you know, I think this is an area in the addiction world that's maybe not as widely addressed, you know, compared to like substance abuse and alcoholism. So what encouraged your professional career growth in sexual addiction?
Yeah, I mean, you touched on a piece of it. I mean, it's a huge cultural taboo almost. This whole idea that anyone could actually be addicted to sex is kind of unfamiliar to many. Many people would say something like, well, isn't it just kind of healthy sexuality and people enjoying themselves? And but it's very apparent how broken that idea is. Part of my family life growing up included this addiction. So like all good therapists, I specialize in the very thing that has affected my world. And so I kind of think it's a flying under the radar, disruptive thing that's happening in our culture. And so what better to step into, personally anyway, that's something that gets me excited, is engaging with something that isn't getting engaged with enough.
Sure, absolutely. And it's great to hear from you as a professional who's specializing in this area. And I think there may be a lot of professionals joining us this evening who may be working more in substance abuse addiction and who may encounter some individuals in practice who have process addictions like sexual addiction. What advice might you offer to these professionals who see and or treat sexual addiction?
That's a great question. Other professionals will know that most addiction is not about the addiction is to a substance or a process, but it's really underlying issues, and that remains the same. So they're well aware of that. One thing that's unique to particularly couples work is this idea of disclosures when it comes to sexual addiction. So really helping the addict to disclose fully. And part of that is to obviously start rebuilding trust. And that looks different to what it would look like with an alcohol addiction, for example.
Right.
So really getting either some training or some good guidance on how to do those disclosures is really important. Secondly, I would say not to get caught in the language. that's a very sticking point with many people. Is it an addiction, a compulsion? People don't like to call it sexual addiction. It's easy to be called an alcoholic and know we're addicted to that. So don't let people wrap you up in the terminology. Help them figure out however they want to label it, and then kind of get involved with the hard work anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last point, actually, I think I've spoken to a number of colleagues who kind of get concerned about what are people going to bring to me? Are they going to start talking about child pornography, and is this going to be terrifying?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer to that is both yes and no. I mean, it's somewhat terrifying when people, like anything, when they bring these really dark corners of their world. But to anyone that's a therapist, it's not terrifying in the same breath. We hear different things regularly, and it comes back to what are we dealing with? What's the kind of the underlying issues? So I would encourage people not to be afraid of it, and to talk to other colleagues that have been through and heard many different things for support as and when you need it.
That's great insight. Thank you so much for sharing that. And lastly, before we let you get started with your presentation, what resources have been helpful to you in your own practice and for your clients who are recovering from a sexual addiction?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I do want to mention one book that is from a faith-based perspective. It's a Christian perspective. So it is an incredibly helpful book. It's called Surfing for God, which is an interesting title and can put many people off. But I've actually found that people, non-Christian clients and Christian clients alike, really resonate with the content, and it's really helpful. It really unpacks a lot of good things for recovery. It's not a complete book, in my opinion, but it's a very helpful kind of wading into the water one. So I'd recommend that to therapists and others alike. The whole world of mindfulness and DBT skills has been a really big kind of underpinning. Mindfulness it's this general sense of, are you really knowing what you know and feeling what you feel? I mean, that's a Bessel van der Kolk statement that I've just stolen from him. But it really touches on kind of the heart of how mindfulness and DBT can inform this work. It's really understanding ourselves. And then community. I'm going to talk more about that in the presentation, so I won't go into that. And lastly, I would mention another book actually called The Soul of Shame. I think with many addictions, and particularly with sexual addiction, shame is a huge piece. The Soul of Shame by Kurt Thompson is a wonderful book. It really helps you to grapple with how can I actually start engaging with shame. So I'd recommend that to anyone that wants to find out more, kind of is wrestling with, I don't want to expose this thing. I need to hide. No one's going to get me if I talk about this. It's a brilliant book for you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Paul. We appreciate this little introduction. And without further ado, we'll let you get started with your great presentation that you have planned.
Okay. And do ask all the questions you have, by the way. Difficult questions are good questions. So I can't answer everything, but let's talk about it. Okay, let me switch over here. Pull out this. I'm going to turn my webcam off here real quick. Okay. So are we set? Can everyone see that?
We are all set. That looks great. Thank you.
Okay. So I kind of changed the title. I kind of ad-libbed a little bit and called it Sexual Addiction and Freedom, because that's what we're really talking about, in my opinion, is moving from addiction to freedom, and what does that look like? So when we think about any issue, I just wanted to kind of introduce us to something in a very specific way. This idea of it hurts, it just hurts so intensely. Sexual addiction does, like most addiction, it causes a lot of problems for people. So there's the internal sense, the emotional, guttural pain that can come with it. And then obviously, when you have an addiction that's in the sexual area of your life, that wreaks havoc with your sexuality within relationship. but also any addiction is going to damage relationships. And physically, you get lots of dysfunction issues that come up around sexual addiction. And then economically, people can end up spending thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars on kind of sexual materials. So this is a real pain that people are struggling with right now. And if you're a therapist listening, you will find that very commonly, and it's a good thing to be asking about. So we've got this thing, we've got this immense pain, and so we have this experience of, well, I need something for this. What can I do? How can I get help? People out there are grappling for guidance, very practical steps. What do I do next to get over, get through, get past my addiction? And that's a question we have to answer for people. And then a common question that goes with that is, well, so how do I cope with temptation? How do I get through these moments as I want to do recovery? It just feels like every part of my being is caving as I go through withdrawal. And that is a tough thing that we, again, need to help people figure out. What else do they need? They need understanding for themselves, like that quote I mentioned earlier, really knowing themselves what's going on. Rebuilding relationships particularly, but rebuilding lots of different pieces of the fabric of life. Addiction really does disrupt the way life goes. And what's the point? Well, we want to live in a way that feels really good. We want to come back to life. And then I said, well, there's an answer. There really is an answer. We can have one. And I want to present to you today just one. There's many out there, but one. A project that I am involved with, Stop Sexual Addiction, has produced, and I'm kind of the main producer of this guide, but the 21 movements towards life. It's about coming back to life. It's very specific in terms of, it is a guide. It'll show you the way. It'll give you specific skills and tools that you need. And it'll promote self-understanding in detail. And it gives you answers to lots of these questions that I've kind of alluded to. So that's just by way of introduction, but really key to know that people are coming with that sense of, ouch, I need help. Can we provide it to you? And the answer is yes. But I wanted to talk a little bit about, how did I get here? It's such a big question people come in with, or people listening might have. How did I end up addicted to this? What is going on? And there's some factors here. I wanted to talk about exposure for a moment. In the bottom left, you can see a picture, the internet, right? We stumble across these things at ever increasingly young ages. People are exposed to pornographic images, kind of the whole 9 yards. It's accessible, it's right here in front of you. You could easily find it. So it's there, it's rampant, it's all through our culture. I put Facebook on here because there's lots of explicit things in and around social media. They've become a very pretty painful access point to hookups and all kinds of different things. So it's there, and it's affecting younger people. There's more and more statistics about how young people are getting exposed early. And I got this picture of a young man here with his phone. I was trying to find a good picture with 2 young men and a phone, but I couldn't. So kind of peer pressure and other people really introducing us. And then this last picture of this girl covering her mouth. For me, this sums up a big part of the exposure, where I'm talking about experiences of abuse, neglect, other kinds of emotional traumas and pain that people can experience. That is a form of exposure to something painful, and I'm going to kind of mention more about that. Pain and loneliness. Pain comes in other forms than loneliness, but loneliness is pretty profound when you're working with addicts. The sense, I just need someone to hug me and tell me I'm not as worthless as I think I am. 95% of the addicts that I have sat with, worked with, would attest to a very similar statement. They just don't believe it. that they could be worthwhile. And that's so painful. We're wired for connection. We're built that way. And we just want someone to like us, to desire us, accept us. All those things I've listed there, they're right at the core of our being. When that is in play, when those things are not being met, we're ripe for an addiction. And why does it become sexual addiction over other addictions? Well, part of that is going back to the exposure piece. And then part of it is this, is choice. Choice is such a big factor that we need to always remember. I don't want to suggest by saying the exposure part and the pain part that we aren't then responsible. We totally are. We're pleasure-seeking animals. We do that a lot. And then I've put numbing here. That is a very common theme for addiction. Numbing out to that pain that I mentioned, escaping another form of that. And intrigued, this is a really important one. We have to remember that we are, again, what I said, sexual beings, right? And it is exciting to be aroused. And those things play into each other, especially in younger years. That's often when sexual addiction can take hold. And I see that regularly, is kind of in the teenage years. I just got hooked. I couldn't look away. This was so fascinating. Bodies and minds are primed for sexual addiction at that point. And so this is a side note, but if you have teenagers, if you find out that they're looking at pornography or they're involved with kind of Snapchat and sending sexual pictures or anything like that, please have conversations with them. Normalize the fact that this is a big area that's difficult and a struggle. It's so key that we start having consistent and ongoing dialogue. And if you're struggling yourself with a sexual addiction, really start working on that and use that as kind of a footing to start engaging young people. That's so important. I kind of alluded to this already, but how did we get here? Our brains. Our brains can really get us in a bind, but they can change. We know that our brains can recover. So I wanted to mention a couple of pieces about sexual addiction in our brain. There's this Coolidge effect, is what it's officially termed. This doesn't just apply to sexual addiction, but it's where our brains get overwhelmed with dopamine. We overstimulate our brains with dopamine as we look at things like moving videos, HD videos, which are just kind of an absolute bombardment of information that release dopamine. That can overwhelm our brains, and our brain starts to really shift in response. Another part of that is we develop a tolerance, right? We end up escalating our use of pornography to get that same hit of dopamine, that same kind of rush. And then eventually we get desensitization as a result from that. Our brain shuts down its response to dopamine. It's kind of saying, oh, please stop. This is too much. I can't tolerate this much dopamine in my system. And then when we lose dopamine, you end up feeling low, helplessness, powerlessness. You kind of feel stuck and drained. And so you go back to the thing you knew that could help you with that, which was the sexual addiction. It gives you that rush of dopamine, but now it's escalating. And now you can see how that pattern, that cycle is going to get you trapped. And then the really painful part that comes with this is what's called sensitization. Our brains get wired to see sexually. And it's almost as if we have a sex-colored filter that kind of fits over all of our interactions with the world. And everything becomes twinged, so we see sexually even when there's nothing sexually to be seen. We focus on it. Interactions with someone of the opposite sex, for example, can't take place without this backdrop, this kind of gnawing sense of, oh, there could be more, there's something here. It becomes sexualized, and your world really takes on a different shape. So I've rifled through, in a sense, kind of how do we get here? But like I alluded to earlier, well, what's the answer? What do we need something here, right? Shame, again, I've mentioned this. I call it the voice of silence. Shame is this extremely painful sensation that we get deep within us. It's that moment where you want to recoil. We go into the hiding place. We don't want to be seen. We don't want people to know. And it's an experience of feeling worthless. People would, if they knew what I did, if they knew what I'm really like, they wouldn't want anything to do with me. That's right at the core of the shame that keeps people trapped so deeply into addiction. And then they feel bad, so they want to go back to their addiction to fix that feeling bad. So that's a very nasty little trap. Again, that voice of silence, the picture there is alluding to that voice. It kind of whispers in your ear. It will pick on every opportunity. Our shame will kind of whisper in our ear. See, they're not going to accept you here. Or no, you really can't talk about this here. These people, they're not going to be caring for you. So understanding that voice and how it uniquely attacks you is so important. We have to learn to, and I've put here, refute the voice. So acknowledging shame is trying to tell me this, my experience. I feel it viscerally. And the antidote to that is exposure. Now there's obviously various ways to do that. Slow, kind exposure with people that you can trust. And that's often the sticking point, is finding people that you can trust. And we're going to come back to that too. Talking about the very thing that seems unspeakable, exposing the silence, so to speak, is so important in recovery. And that space needs to be found. I would encourage you to start it in writing if you don't have safe people yet. If you're working with clients that are struggling with that, get them to write to themselves, to read back their own thoughts, to start communicating even to themselves at first. So defeating shame is a big key. Understand yourself. I just love this picture of this little guy. I thought it was brilliant. I feel like that sometimes. I'm kind of trying to see right into my own soul, kind of pointing at myself like, what is going on in here? And it's that real journey of discovery of yourself. Addicts need that. They need it like water. They're so very often disconnected with just about every part of their experience. Emotions, number one. Often you get an addict suffering from alexithymia, which effectively just means I can't name any of my experience, my feelings. I don't know how to do that. So teaching them, one, what emotions do, and then how to start naming them is so important. And then our vulnerabilities. This little guy probably is not aware of any vulnerabilities at this point, and good for him at this point. But when he grows up, he needs to know, where have I been hurt? Where is that pain that I've talked about earlier? Where is that in my world? What does that predispose me to? Where am I exposed? When do I feel like I can't cope? Moving into this overwhelmed idea. Am I overwhelmed? What tells me that in my body? Right down to that gut feeling. What is that all about? Really starting to learn that. And we can teach people how to do that, invite them to that as therapists. Our needs. Addiction and needs get very messy. Our needs seem to be this addiction, be it process or substance, and we forget all the other needs that we really have, that this little guy in this picture would know about. The need to be held, to be touched without sexual intent, to be really cared for, to be attuned to have someone watch me, to know me, to listen to me. And then what are my dreams? What is my goal? Where am I going? If you're listening to this and you are struggling yourself with sexual compulsion or addiction, dive into these areas. All 5 of those are so key for you to know yourself, to start moving away from addiction. Now, this picture is my absolute favorite. This guy's clearly got it wrong. He's about to lacerate himself in all kinds of ways. No, he needs a razor. And that is often the case with sexual addiction recovery. We can find ourselves kind of plugging different pieces that we've picked up along the way that could help people, but we miss the mark and we end up saying, well, here's a knife, when we really need something a lot more subtle. I wanted to tell you a few of the ways that I do that specifically, and I've put here breathing. And I really mean this. You've got a YouTube link there to, I think that's the one, to the 4 square breathing. But it's this sense of regulating our nervous system. So breathing is an age-old remedy for stress or calming ourselves down. And that is because it takes control of your nervous system. It activates the calming mechanism of your body. And so in those moments where you're feeling tempted, you're feeling high emotions, or you're feeling terrified, or all kinds of different things, breathing for an addict is something to start learning straight away. How to use that to start calming the body so that they can remain fully functioning in their kind of prefrontal cortex, the thinking part of their brain. It's so important to do. I could talk about breathing forever. It's absolutely one of my favorite things. When we do practice this, as I would recommend to anyone, you start to change your vagal nerve tone, which is a nerve that runs right through the center of your being. When you regulate that, you're more steady, more stable, more centered, and you feel that viscerally. It's not a heady thing. It becomes really grounded. And we can talk more about how to do that. Meditation is part of that. Meditation isn't kind of a spiritual Buddhist thing that I'm talking about. I'm talking about self-awareness and learning to sit, understand, be reflective about all those things I've alluded to. What are my needs? What is my body doing? What am I experiencing? Combining that with breathing really starts to regulate us, get us back to the quote I said right at the beginning, knowing what we know and feeling what we feel. Then we can choose well, we can act well. I've got yoga on here too. There's a lot of research that has shown us how yoga is really effective for trauma. I've not seen as much mentioned about addiction, and yet often many addicts suffer from trauma as well. When we do yoga, we learn self-control. We learn, again, breathing. We learn how to notice the parts of our body and hold them in tension even. And that, again, is something we need to get through stressful periods and temptations alike. So I'm big on that. I really focus on that with people. Mindfulness and decision making too. These are skills that we really, really have to give people. We really have to help people with. Firstly, I've got here how to ride out temptations. Now, a temptation to act out, as we use in kind of the sexual addiction world, that vernacular means doing the unwanted sexual behavior. How do I ride out that desire to do it, the craving? Again, I'm going to suggest breathing is part of it, and then learning about how emotions rise and they fall after about 20 minutes. How we can, well, let me say it this way. I will teach clients and have them practice simply sitting in a chair, breathing as they've learnt to do, relaxing their body through tension and relaxation. Acknowledge the temptation. Acknowledge, I'm feeling tempted right now. Then asking themselves the question, what is happening within me that I feel a need for something? What is talking to me and then to breathe, focus on their breath and any sense of their own need that comes up. Not the temptation, but any genuine need, and breathing through that. And if you can focus on something that isn't the temptation for about 15 to 20 minutes, scientifically we know that that passes and fades. It's kind of riding it out, riding that wave. If you are familiar with the 12 steps, they often talk about surrendering to God or surrendering in general, saying, I can't do this, I need help. Part of that surrendering is what I've just described, is turning your mind away and riding out that temptation. Making life decisions, that's really big. We forget that sometimes when we're dealing with someone that struggled with an addiction, because they have made decisions based on either faulty, I don't really like this word, but faulty thinking, distorted thinking, and distorted sense of need. So really teaching people, how do you do that? The pictures you've got here, 8 and 13, are alluding to steps within the guide that I've mentioned that talk about how do we deal with temptation and impulses, and how do I problem solve? How do I make effective life decisions from a stable, centered state that is going to be better than just kind of trying and going about it without much consideration? And we've talked about how to know what you need. Mindfulness is kind of key to that. It's a key part of meditation. And this is a biggie. Now, it's a biggie for kind of all addictions. And we need to get into it too with sexual addiction. Triggers, what am I talking about? It's those things that either you see something, you're exposed to something. Those are the external triggers, so things that can come in through your peripheral senses. Or we have internal triggers, and you've got an example of that, number 2 on there. It says loneliness. That's an internal trigger because it's that painful feeling. When I feel pain like that, I want to numb it. I want to get away. And so where is that? Well, we find loneliness wherever we are at times. And then the real key thing with triggers is planning actively the solutions. How do I avoid this? What will I do when this kicks in, when I have this trigger? And those are the things that you can track as you go through recovery, and you can get people to think of preemptively if they are getting familiar with what they struggle with. And then at the bottom there, you've got this idea of rituals. We develop rituals as people all the time. We're very story-driven in the way we operate in this world. We make stories, rituals, we get into habits, and we thrive on that. You've got an example here, this idea of taking my phone with me into the bathroom. I know this might be uncomfortable for some to kind of think about, but often that can be a place where people do random reading and kind of surf the internet, and one thing leads to another. And so we need to replace those rituals with healthy behavior. So what am I going to do instead of my ritual? What's the healthy response? And what is the rule that goes with that? So instead of living out this story, I'm going to create a new rule for myself that changes the story, the dynamic that I'm a part of. And when we start doing that according to our values, then they start to take hold. They have meaning to us. If I really value being present at home, then it's really hard for me to pull out my phone when my kids are around, for example, if I know that I've changed that narrative for myself. So those kind of mingle together for sure, but anyone struggling with this needs to really get into that kind of work. I like to help people think about shifting their life rather than recovering from sexual addiction. In a sense, plan A has failed. It has sucked. I felt trapped. It's overwhelmed me. Maybe someone's told me to go get help. So I need plan B. It's not to shame people, but it's to invite them to something new, something better. I didn't like my plan A. I want plan B. And often that starts with, well, what are your goals? What do you really want? And an addict who is potentially depressed might need a lot of help with that. Really, what do they want most out of life? What can they dream of? Setting them free to imagine something new. If you are struggling, I would invite you to do that. What are your goals? Dream big. Throw off the kind of the blinders and all the practicality at this point and dream. Start to think, what do I really want most out of life? And then planning. Planning talks about how do I go towards those goals. But you need to plan even more than that. Planning some of the things we've talked about earlier. So planning for triggers for sure. Planning if you're going to do meditation, but also planning in terms of what's my schedule going to look like? So much of my time has been geared towards making space for my addiction. How do I plan a different lifestyle? It kind of touches back into this story, this narrative idea. What am I living for? So that's hand in hand with goals. And I like to use this term setups. And what I'm talking about with that is even changing a room. So if someone has compulsively acted out in their living room, for example, I'll ask them to change the way the room looks. Move the sofa to the other side. Get rid of the TV maybe. Get some light reading in there. Shift the whole thing. Get your family on board with that. Let them know what it's for. It's about this re-envisioning. I'm going to set up this new way, this new place. That also helps break some of the brain's automatic associations. Our brains are meaning-making machines. They see things that we've seen before, and they automatically pull up old memories. So if you've acted out somewhere, your brain sees it and says, oh, do you remember this? And you go, oh, yeah, I do. And your brain's kind of in that mode. But if you've changed it, it's harder for that to happen. So that's quite a good strategy. Relationships. We have to learn to validate. All of us do, and addicts especially. Learning to validate someone else's experience and their own. Learning to validate, this is how I'm feeling. I get that I'm feeling this, and this is why, for example. Again, we've talked a lot about needs, but integrating them. So in relationships particularly, you have two people. What do they need from each other? What does the relationship need? That's a big piece of often couples therapy. We have to communicate all those pieces, those needs and emotions. And then more, starting to communicate at all can often be a hard first step. This communicating touches back to, if you remember, I talked about exposing with shame. So communicating is the opposite. It's the opposite of hiding. But we have to do that with safe people. What does safe people mean? Well, safe people are the people that are going to hear you, stand there and not judge you. They're going to stand there or sit there with you. They're going to hear you out and attempt to empathize with you. They're going to sit there and understand what it's like from your side. They might not do it perfectly. That's often impossible. But who are those people that aren't going to then share my story in places that I haven't wanted them to, that aren't going to talk about this, but are going to respect this journey that I'm on? And here I want to mention accountability, and that should be with a safe person. Anyone that is struggling with an addiction, in my mind, really needs someone that they can call, can approach at any point and say, I'm really struggling, please just listen, be there for me, whatever it is. And again, there's ways to go about that. So how can I do it? How can I get over sexual addiction? How can you help other people to do that same thing? We've talked a lot about some of the tools and the skills and those pieces, but how can you do it? It seems obvious, but start now. And the way you do that is change your access. Get rid of access to anything sexual as much as you can. So that's internet. Get rid of it on your phone if you can. Filters on your computer, all those kind of pieces. And that can even include changing your route to work if you pass billboards that are provocative. I've done that with people, and it's been really helpful. They start their day differently. It's a different state that they're in at that point. Exposure, get rid of it. Exposure here doesn't just mean the same as access. It means exposure in terms of things like friends. If you have friends that often make sexual jokes or unhelpful things like that, getting people to think through their world, to think through all the places they come into contact with distractions or temptations. Community, build it, get in relationships. I can't emphasize that enough. If you take away nothing else, that is the key. Shame, community. That's kind of one of the things I will always return to. Help, you need to enlist it now. Get that accountability partner. Get a resource. Ask questions, all those kind of things. I always like to tell people this too, be prepared. It will be painful, confusing, you may get depressed. Once you've taken away your coping strategy, it's hard to cope, and that is normal. So don't be surprised by that. Other people may be concerned about you, or your spouse may be really frustrated that you've had a sexual addiction and hurt them, and so you've got all this stuff going on. Be prepared for success too. Success can often actually throw us backwards because it feels unknown, it feels new, and it can be scary. You're going to get new things too. So this picture here, where you've kind of got a loop effect in this diversion, is pretty accurate. We can often go round and round in recovery. So I talked about enlisting help. This is the guide that I've alluded to, that I've shown you snippets of. This is the guide that I've put together with the hope that it really answers lots of questions. It's very, very practical, gives you templates, worksheets, teaches you about validation, teaches you about relationships, engages you to understand and know yourself. It is built of 21 movements, 21 steps, if you would prefer, and they're really geared towards life. They're really looking towards how do I want to live and how can I go about it. That's the guide that I've written, and I think really does a good job of covering most of the key bases. Recovery groups, that's another one. Anyone that is a sex addict should really get in a recovery group. SA, for example, Sexaholics Anonymous is a great one. I put ignore this at your peril, and I say that because of experience. Having led therapy groups for sexual addiction, having led support groups, having met with many individuals as well, I have anecdotal evidence, at least, that shows they are so key because they are hand-in-hand people that get it. They understand you. It is a validation of you just from walking in the group. So I really would encourage everyone to take that very seriously and encourage clients or people that you know that are struggling to get in a group, even if they hate it. It's very common, they hate it, but then they learn to love it and often don't want to miss. And then obviously there's great need for professional support. You can have inpatient or outpatient recovery facilities. I've put there that one of my favorites is actually an outpatient setup called Restoring the Soul. It's in Colorado. It is kind of intensive therapy, but I recommend it highly. I've had clients go there and do very well through it, enjoy it very much. And then also therapists. I would encourage people to look for those that, I say trained, but really have a grounding in sexual addiction. Any good therapist is a good therapist, and then they can kind of additionally understand sexual addiction. So that's my whirlwind tour through sexual addiction for you. I hope that's helped some of you in some way. Please ask questions. Please ask hard and difficult questions if you have them, or things that you think are silly, because there really isn't a silly question in this. And I'll attempt to answer it, and if not, hopefully point you somewhere that you might get that answered. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul. It was a wonderful presentation, and we just really appreciate you sharing your insight and your experience on this really important topic. And just to all our attendees who are present with us tonight, just a reminder that you have this opportunity to submit any questions to Paul or about his presentation, and you can do that through the questions pane of your control panel. And Paul, we do have a few questions. If that's okay, I'll go ahead and share these with you. One of our attendees is wondering if you can repeat the name of the books. I think in your in our initial interview in the beginning, you mentioned a couple of books as resources.
Yeah, I'll be happy to. Surfing for God by Michael Cusick is the first one, and then The Soul of Shame by Kurt Thompson. That's The Soul of Shame. Those are both really good. The Soul of Shame isn't directly about sexual addiction, but applies.
Great, thank you so much. Another question here for you. Do you feel family therapy is useful for dealing with a teen or youth with sexual addiction?
Oh, that's such a good question. Um, I'm going to unfortunately answer that partly with it depends on the context. Yes, it can help. I'm actually going to recommend a book to whoever asked that question. Um, there's a book called Angry Birds and Killer Bees. I can't remember the author off the top of my head, but it's incredibly helpful. It talks about how to engage teenagers in this whole issue. It's such a good book. It's really easy to read. It's short. But that family therapy, yes, it can be very helpful. The key thing you don't want to do is to identify that teenager as the problem patient, for example. If that teenager goes into family therapy thinking, I am here and my whole family is here because they think I'm a dirty pervert, you're in trouble right from the get-go. I would want to bring it back into the family and bring the family issues in, right? And say, so if this teenager is struggling with addiction, what has set them up for that? What are they? And it may be just a case of, I got stuck in this because I was intrigued, and they need help to understand how to get out of that. But normally there's kind of more issues than that. Where is their emotional expression in the family? What is the family doing with each other? How much engagement? I don't mean to sound like I'm bashing anyone that asked the question and saying it's their fault. That's not at all what I'm doing. But a good family therapist should help with all those dynamics. So yes, it can be very helpful. I hope that helps. I hope that's somewhat clear.
Thank you, Paul. Another question from one of our attendees is wondering if you can speak to symptoms that might indicate that a higher level of care is needed for sexual addiction.
Yeah, good question. It's a common question too. I should have addressed that. I'm sorry I didn't. Um, so things you're looking for are continued relapse. So when you're going through recovery, there's lapses and relapses. A lapse is, I acted out again, I used pornography again, I'm so remorseful. I've shared it with my accountability person, maybe my spouse if that's the setup I'm using, and I'm lamenting that and I'm really figuring it out. A relapse is different. It's, oh, well, I guess I'm just back here again. Oh, I don't care about recovery. It's kind of the core is the attitude, the heart orientation behind it. However, if someone has gone through multiple lapses, my first question is, what changes have you actually made on the ground? What practical support and advice have you gotten? And if that's not good, I'd rectify that first. And I'd also encourage them into recovery group communities, like I alluded to. If someone has been in recovery for 6 months, not made any progress, I'm starting to think maybe we need a higher level of care. 6 months might sound like a long time for someone who has a spouse, for example, going through this. But I want to encourage you, addiction is really tricky. It can be really hard. The higher level of care is incredibly expensive, so that's always a thing that has to be factored in, sadly. if someone is not making progress with the resources that they've got and they've attempted to use them, then that's probably your chance to go to a higher level of care. Again, it's subjective. I'd be happy to talk to someone about that. If someone who's asked that question wants to kind of go through that and is happy to talk about it, I'd be happy to set up a time to spend some time discussing that with them.
Thank you so much for addressing that, Paul. And kind of a follow-up to that question, one of our attendees is asking, how readily do insurance companies cover a higher level of care for sexual addiction, if you know any information about that?
Not as much as we would like, sadly. It really isn't all that much. Um, it's one of the really tricky parts of this area in the field is the definition. You're more likely to get treatment under another diagnosis. Most of at least as far as I'm aware, and I might be wrong on this, and I'm happy for someone to correct me, but as far as I understand, most treatment centers aren't really using insurance for sexual addiction, which makes it really costly. But there may be some programs out there that have managed to get funding under a different diagnosis like depression or just addiction in general. So I don't know exactly. You'd have to do some research on that.
Thank you, Paul. Another question here. One of our attendees is wondering what is, or how, I guess, do you involve spouses in sexual addiction recovery?
Oh, it's such a heartbreaking and hard question. Thanks for asking that. In a nutshell, the pieces that I would encourage would be this. If the addict is willing to do a disclosure, aka revealing what they have been engaged with, so that the spouse has the full picture, not the details, not the graphic details. That is never good. That is just traumatic. To get everything out in the open so that trust can start to be rebuilt, I would have the two spouses involved in that process going through that. Then I would have support for the spouse as she or he goes through the fallout of that. And then on an ongoing basis, I normally set up, and it depends obviously on couples, but a check-in with the spouse kind of once a week is normal, is typical. And that is very straightforward, where the addict says, this is how I'm doing this week. This is, have I acted out or not? What am I doing about that? And then also practicing their sense of understanding themselves. So saying to the spouse, this is what I think is the reason why I'm struggling right now. Maybe I'm not trying hard enough, could be the answer they give. Or I'm really dealing with a lot of shame right now, and it keeps tripping me up. So setting up a check-in. I would never, ever have a spouse be an accountability person for their spouse. That doesn't go well. They need someone outside to do that work, someone that they can go to frequently and whenever they need to. Spouse shouldn't do that. The other thing I'm going to encourage a spouse to do is to do the hard and painful work of grieving what this has meant for them, the loss, the pain, and holding their firm line of, this is what I need from you, addicted spouse, to stay safe for myself. So the betrayed spouse, I'm going to encourage them to think about what are the things that you need to not have in your relationship, very specifically. So, for example, if we're out in public, I need you to not look at another person. Then if they do, you're going to have a consequence to that. If you do, I'm going to leave. I'm going to go home. I'm going to leave you there. I'm going to go home. Not to punish the addict, but to very firmly say, this is what I need for me to recover, for me to be okay. to present that to the addict and say, I need you to do these for me. If we're going to work on this relationship, this is what I need. So that's kind of a window into that. Hopefully that's a little bit helpful.
Thank you, Paul. I appreciate that insight. And we have one more question here for you. Our attendee is wondering if you can speak about sexual addiction as a co-occurring disorder, and how that is usually treated.
That is one of the articles that I've actually written for Addiction Hope. So I'd encourage you to go find that one. That should be on there. You should be able to find it. That's a great question. How is it normally treated? Is there a normal, would be my response. There are different ways. It depends what it's co-occurring with. You need to handle depression. You need to handle anxiety, and some of the more severe kind of co-occurring things simultaneously. You can't drop either. So in individual therapy, the best way to deal with those is to simply work with both at once, addressing whichever is most pertinent at the time. Inpatient settings will do a lot of work with depression. That's really the best answer I can give to that, outside of the article that I wrote, because again, it's one of those context-dependent concerns.
Thank you, Paul. And we actually have one more question, if that's okay. One of our attendees is wondering, is there a higher risk of sexual assault with individuals who are sexually addicted?
As in perpetrating or receiving?
That was not specified.
Okay. Sexual addiction, because of the sex-colored filter that I alluded to, if someone is truly addicted, they can be at slightly higher risk of perpetrating. And likewise, someone that, on the other side, someone that is a sex addict, who's really struggling with their sexuality and using it to deal with emotional pain, relational pain, some of those experiences that I alluded to earlier on, they can more readily get into sexual situations where they could well be hurt, particularly if they're doing things like hookups, particularly anonymous ones. Then yes, there is a very real potential to get into dangerous situations more easily, but it's not a blanket yes to that question.
Thank you, Paul. And that wraps up our questions for this evening. And if we can maybe just end with, if you wouldn't mind sharing where we can find out more information about you and the workbook that you mentioned that you have available, if you wouldn't mind sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely. The website is Stop Sexual Addiction, all joined up, all kind of like one word, .com. So stopsexualaddiction.com. You can find that guide there. You can contact me through that. My own individual website is stlouiscounselor.com, with Saint being spelled out SAINT, louiscounselor.com. I do provide consultations in this area, so if someone wants to discuss anything particularly. I also do online therapy too, so if someone is interested in kind of contacting me about that kind of thing, I'd be happy to talk. But feel free to keep asking questions through those two avenues to contact me. Feel free to shoot me an email, and we can talk more.
Great. Thank you so much again for your excellent presentation, Paul. And thank you everyone for attending our webinar today on understanding sexual addiction. If you do have any further questions about our presentation this evening, you can also contact me directly at Crystal, crystal@edhnetwork.com, and I'd be happy to assist you with any further questions. Once you leave today's webinar, you will receive a survey on the presentation, and we would appreciate if you would complete that and provide your feedback. You should also receive a follow-up email within 24 to 48 hours with a link to view a recording of today's webinar. So on behalf of Addiction Hope and our presenter, Paul Loosemore, thank you again for joining us tonight, and enjoy your evening.